TRITEC Development Group. This webinar will also be live streamed on our newly created YouTube account, Real Estate Institute at Stony Brook University. If you can, please subscribe, like, and share to promote this channel, because if we can monetize it over time, this channel will result in more resources, 100% of which will go back to the students at Stony Brook University. I want to thank you all in attendance. I'm sure that you'll find our discussion today to be of interest to you. And with that, I'd like to turn the program over to Dave Pennetta.
Thank you, Pat. Good
you.
morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for letting us into your offices and your homes, people working from home. We have been spending a lot of time at the Real Estate Institute with thought leadership, looking at what some of the issues are here on the island, and responding with the symposia, luncheons, and white papers to sort of help Long Island along. This past year has been a difficult year with COVID-19. As we're dealing with that, it's been a very difficult political climate, both nationally and local. So we have a lot to talk about. The area that we're covering today is something that's, I think, is extremely important, because I was reading Newsday today, and there were two projects in there mentioned, and the articles basically were just mentioning the opposition against the development. And I find that when you have intelligent discussions with intelligent people, even if they're initially coming in from a different perspective, you find if we're all dealing with the same facts and data, our opinions miraculously become more similar. So with that, we've got a very diversified group here that are leaders in the industry in both Long Island, regionally and super regionally. I'd like to start with Russ Albanese. He's got 40 years experience in real estate, working at his family's company that's got 70 years of experience in real estate. He's, branch Manhattan and Long Island, Garden City, Wyandanch, which is what we're going to be talking a little bit more about today. They've built high-end luxury residential, office space, and transit-oriented suburban downtown. Then we'll move over to Russ Tepper. He's the Senior Managing Director of Development for Mill Creek Residential. His areas are in the Northeast, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, and Pennsylvania. They've built a lot in Hempstead, West Hempstead, and Mineola here on the island. But his company has developed all across the United States and maybe beyond that as well. And lastly, we have our Rob Kent, which is an REI board member. He's coming from the legal side, specialized in entitlements, acquisitions, environmental. He's got advanced degrees from New York University in real estate finance and his law degree at Loyola Law School. So guys, thank you very much for taking time out of your day today and speaking with us. So
thank you for inviting us.
Sure. So let me just start with a couple of facts. Some of them still haven't changed much, just to sort of set the stage. The housing supply on Long Island for apartments is 17%. Versus 34% for Connecticut, Westchester, Jersey. So we're about half of what our contemporaries are. We're still about 100,000 units shy of having, meeting demand. When I was talking to some of you, there's like 1,000 people applying for 100 apartments at times. You know, we've had a change probably 15, 20 years ago in responding to the market here. You know, I think I've said previously, I've been married for 27 years. And when we got married, you know, we rented part of a house. That's what you do here in Long Island. You know, you rent part of a house in a single family neighborhood. But if I had the choice to be in any one of the three new apartments with, you know, people of similar age, with amenities and clubhouse and pool and all those other things, we would much rather have done that. So part of the problem we're dealing here is fear. Biggest human motivator is fear of change, the unknown. Also, when someone else makes money, there's still a belief that someone else must lose money. So here we're trying to bring a little bit of light into what do these developments do to a community? Because we all know when we're standing in front of a village, a town, you know, or the county, one of the first things you hear is my home value in the neighborhood is going to go down. So I want to talk a little bit about that, and maybe Russell, Russ Tepper, why don't we start with you? Because you've got two different types of development here, Mineola and then Hempstead, which are attracting different types of renters. You know, one is a very mature market, right? Mineola. It's not like you're trying to rejuvenate that, and not even that you're trying to rejuvenate necessarily Hempstead, but you've chosen two different types of development opportunities here. So if you could just talk a little bit about what your developments have done in each of those type of locations, to the community.
Sure, happy to do so. We've been developing on Long Island for over 10 years, and in each of the communities we've developed in, there has been a need to not only attempt to address the demand for multifamily housing, as you pointed out, but also a need to redevelop the area, the particular property that we want to develop and the area surrounding it. So when we developed West 130 and Metro 303 in West Hempstead and Hempstead a number of years ago, those were areas that were in severe need of improvement and more residents in the community, people that were active in the community, but also didn't necessarily work in the community and wanted to live near a train to commute to and from New York, but be able to enjoy the local community in the evenings and on the weekends. So we created a little bit of a place when we developed those communities. Mm-hmm. Let's fast forward a number of years when we developed our first community in Mineola, now called the Allure. The need there was to satisfy a community that had many commuters in it traveling to New York City, but not a lot of newer housing options. And so when we developed that property, at the time was called Moderator Mineola, the value proposition there was to offer housing options for folks that worked at the hospital, folks that worked in the Nassau County facilities, and also to take advantage of the downtown community that existed there and in nearby Garden City, while also building, as you mentioned, a very highly amenitized community, which is frankly the case in all the communities we develop. Mm-hmm. And then just a couple of years ago, we built a second community in Mineola to build on that momentum under the same philosophy, which was also quite successful, accessible after a very short walk to the train station for commuters, and also was built in a fashion that was highly amenitized, was available through a short walking distance to downtown and Garden City. And the communities that are in our pipeline now on Long Island, we have another community that we're in the midst of getting entitled in West Hempstead and 3 other communities, which I cannot mention. And they all fit that mold. They're in locations where there's a very low supply of competitive product type. There is a surrounding community that supports the type of product we're delivering, which is, a very high-end, service-oriented, highly amenitized product. And it's not just on Long Island that philosophy has worked. We are also very active in Northern New Jersey and Westchester County, and starting to be more active in the outer boroughs. And we believe that that's the way to go, because the majority of the residents that live in the communities that we build are renters by choice, not by necessity. Mm-hmm. They could choose to buy a home or buy a townhome, but they'd rather rent and not have all the necessary obligations of owning, while still having the, living in an environment that we've created that is home-like for them.
Good. So for our viewership, understand this. Like, let's take Mineola, for example, is a much different environment than Hempstead. However, the mayor of the village of Mineola very early on said, look, we're losing our youth. They're leaving the community. The church was even having a problem because when there wasn't young families coming there, buying homes there, they were having an issue, with their, membership there, with their funding. And actually, Russell and I worked on a project on Searing Avenue where it was actually a church property that was sold because of that change within the community. And also it's Mineola, Garden City, that whole border there where you have the majority of your housing is not considered blighted, by any means, but bringing in a different demographic has strengthened the communities, and the village is now in a much better situation where, renters eventually, young couples living, when they get married, they live there, they decide to have kids, the suburban thing is still to buy a home when you're thinking about having the kid. So they're buying locally because they're already used to the train. They already know where the supermarket is, their doctor's there, everything is there. So they wind up staying local. So that's satisfying, that need there as well.
You mentioned something that's pretty important, David, and that is having a supportive administration, right, supportive governing body, and staff members at the local municipality that understand the vision that we collectively are trying to create for the community. They understand what density means, and that that's not a bad word. They understand the minimal negative impacts, if any, that we create when we develop properties. They understand all the job creation and the tax rateables and the minimal school-age children that communities that we develop create. And so we focus more of our time on trying to bring new living environments in those communities because we know that they get it. And I'm sure many people in this session can speak to experiences where that hasn't been the case, and the process has taken awfully long and sometimes without positive results.
Yeah. So I think the dialogue and the forum for the dialogue has changed, where municipalities, even before COVID, were under pressure with, the tax cap. And so looking to sort of broaden the tax base, and then even people like myself, like I don't need a part-time job, but I'm on the Huntington Planning Board. And one of the reasons was to sort of bridge that gap between the development side and the municipal side. So like I said before, if everybody's dealing with the same set of facts, the opinions become much more similar, which helps these things, helps the stuff move forward. So Rob, so Patchogue was sort of like the next poster child after Mineola. And that was a whole different dynamic. Patchogue was a blighted area. I mean, if you look at the history of Patchogue, it was a pinnacle area, 70 years ago. And then it's gone through different cycles. And you guys came in and put in, hundreds of millions of dollars. The community responded with other developers coming in. And then they wound up having not only rentals, but for sale. Talk a little bit about when you first started getting involved, in that. And again, that's another village. So villages are a lot easier to deal with than a township. It's a much more, smaller, homogeneous group of people in a village than in a township. So, but Rob, talk a little bit about there. And again, our topic is the changes to a community, as this development happens. So that's a very big, broad area. Talk to us about that.
Oh, what Russell just said about the government. So you don't need a government that is, we're not going to, be a big block into your project. You need active support, and you need, and Paul Pontieri and the board of Patchogue, they love their community, and they saw what had it become. And obviously the corner of Main and Main down there was Sweezy's that had been empty 10 years. So, but they were a village, that's important, but they were one of those special villages that had a sewer system and allows this kind of density. So I'd like to, we did not put in hundreds of millions, but certainly over 100. But it did spur other types of investment, like these downtown Main Street grants. Obviously, Claire Rose moved out of there, and I think Mike was able to get some condos built. You had the Copper Beach when he was with, I think it was Pulte. You had Art Space. So there was not just us. I think there was a pretty good group of activity, and again, spurred by you had a village that had a great history, had great bones. There was a train station, there was a sewer. But I will tell you, when we were trying to find money for that, you could, $100 million, you could be in Paris, Manhattan, San Francisco, or Patchogue, where, there was someone got beat up. So it was a bit of a challenge, but now that story's being told more. And the one thing I like about Patchogue for this topic that we're talking about now, because of all those different projects that were going on, thanks to the mayor and the town trustees, they did, I think it's Long Island Regional Planning Council, and I think it's called Forward Planning. They did a kind of a forensic after the fact study. I don't know if anyone else has already seen it. I think it came out a few years ago, but they actually studied all the things that actually occurred. Public art, the economic activity for the county in general, as it concentric circles went out, $600+ million of activity and economic investment. You had the local single family homes, like I think you started off with how people think the homes are going to go down in value. Homes have gone up in value. I think Patchogue even suspended its village tax because it got so much money coming in from sales tax and other things. So it's rarely does anyone spend the money after the fact. I mean, we always go into one of these projects with economic study, feasibility studies, et cetera. It was so good to see someone actually spend the money, not us, of course, but someone actually spend the money to see, what really happened. And Patchogue was one of those great stories. It still is. I mean, you hear some problems with parking, et cetera. I know people don't even realize we have 300 parking spaces underground. It's not us, but Paul Pontieri says it best, that full parking spaces is not a parking problem. Empty parking spaces is a parking problem. So yeah, we really saw a renaissance. I think we got started down there. It was, late 2000, 2005, et cetera, trying to do an assemblage. Even with a supportive government, it took years. And then of course you have Article 78 challenges, and our despite the goal of that challenge, to be expeditious, it is not. It doesn't take much for one of those to get started to slow a project down. We had 4 of them, I believe. So it took many, many years, and that's why you don't see a lot of national developers on Long Island. People look at you like, so when did you get started? 2005. Yeah, we're going to go to Texas or something. So, but Long Island is different. We have some projects down in Virginia where it's kind of a green field development, and you're creating the downtowns. You guys have all heard of them, Reston, those kind of things. Long Island's different. Long Island does have some very great downtowns that have gotten fallen behind a little bit. Some of the big box knocked some of these people out, but I think I mentioned this in one of the public hearings in Port Jefferson. It's a lot easier to help a community that's stumbled. It's easier to help someone who's stumbled to keep them from falling than it is to let them fall, break their leg, and then pick them up and try and fix it. So, and I think, as Russell said, sometimes you get an enlightened local community and government, and they see that. And we're seeing that in Lindenhurst too, that, you just started to see some of the storefronts going empty. They wanted us to, they actually came to us, and we should be delivering 260 units there this June.
So I think on that point, it's also easier, like you said, to rejuvenate a community than to try to create one from scratch. It's tough to create a downtown from scratch. We've got some great downtowns here, and a lot of them, even I live near Huntington Village, and there's been a lot of apartments in there. And I remember back in early 2000s, it was the malls are killing the downtowns. Now we're hearing the downtowns are killing the malls, and it's largely because of the apartments. People want the walkability. But land use, we've seen a lot of progress over the past 10 or 15 years, but land use authorities are designed to slow down change. And not necessarily in a bad way, even though many times it does come out in a bad way, but they want to make sure that the community grows, it's growing in the right direction, it's providing revenues, provide for the future. We're going through that right now with Melville, where we're doing something called an EOD, which is an employment-oriented district. There's no train station there, and it's changing, a successful business park. So it's sort of tougher to come in and say, well, it's a successful business park. There's not a lot of vacancy, but it would be a better place if we were able to create some green space, create some apartments, and I can talk about a little bit about Huntington Station because I was involved on the municipal side there. But Russ Albanese, so you had the job here with Wyandanch. You had a cooperative land use body and political climate, but there wasn't a downtown there. There wasn't a lot of amenities, and you've put up a few hundred units there. So talk about that and how that's sort of different than some of these others, but how you're still contributing to the community, in a positive way because of this development.
Sure. Thanks, David. Well, as you mentioned, and Rob and Russell have stressed, a proactive and collaborative municipality is essential. And what drew us to Wyandanch back in 2011 was the fact that the multi-year planning effort, which really began circa 2002, 2003, where the community got together with the town of Babylon, and led a whole visioning process, a planning effort that culminated years later in a 40-acre master plan. And at that point, when the town also went through the zoning, extensive property acquisitions. So I think pretty unique for Long Island when the town actually takes the leadership and decides what, with the community, what do they want. And at the time we got involved and competed through an RFP process, there was already a very good plan in place. And through the process, we also, we had not developed in the town of Babylon before, but really had come to realize that, hey, this is great planning. It's the community's behind it. We're welcome. Let's proceed, and let's really compete for this. And notwithstanding the fact that Wyandanch had the distinction of being one of the most underserved communities on Long Island, we felt that this was it was a great opportunity to join with the town and the community to help revitalize the community. And at the time, the main goals were economic development, job and career creation, and creation of affordable and workforce housing. And so looking back, beginning with I think the initial planning effort, it really brought the community together. And by the time from 2003 to 2011, there was a lot of excitement that had been built in the community. And we broke ground on our first building in 2013, and have 3 buildings completed to date, about 300 apartments, another 100 under construction, and 250 more in design. So it's been a gradual progress, and it's been a very positive influence on the community, and working with the community, it's brought a public square to the community that has things that more affluent communities on Long Island have had for a very long time. There was not a lot of infrastructure. Before we got started, Wyandanch also never had sewers. So that was a major investment in the public sector that made it possible for multifamily development. To this day, there's been a lot of progress. Our first building, our first commercial tenant was New York Community Bank, which was the first new bank and the only bank in Wyandanch in decades, with the exception of a teller window at a local supermarket. And this past February, Chase Bank just opened up a brand new branch in the development as well. So there's been many signs of positive impact throughout the community.
Yeah, and some of the bigger ones, there's a new train station, platform and structure. You got double track benefits this, and this is on the Ronkonkoma line, which is, very fast into to New York City. What we see in some of the others, like in Huntington, I could speak to, because of the development that's happened there, the people that have owned the older garden apartments have put millions of dollars into those properties, both in landscaping, in facade, in interior renovations. and have, sort of uplifted some of the old supply. And we're seeing even the residents in the area are more house proud than they were before. And they're doing landscaping and fixing things up. And if you look at the numbers, the values of homes, have gone up, and you're attracting, there's an amusement area with batting cages, putt-putt golf, and some other amenities there. The banks, for some reason, you don't really think about it, but the less affluent areas don't have banks. So that's a big plus, and that was something the community, was reaching out for. Wyandanch, looks beautiful when you go through there, and hopefully as we move forward, some of those other properties on the outside fringe of your development will continue to get redeveloped, and that will lead to additional benefits, from your development. So Rob Kent, let's talk about Ronkonkoma. So whereas when I was talking to you, it was like, okay, this is your new project. And you were like, you knew like from 20 years ago. Here you got the benefit of the airport, the train, obviously, and also proximity to the Long Island Expressway. You don't have a downtown, right? So you have that issue. But tell us about that, because that's your next project that you've started, but you're continuing to expand.
Yeah, so Ronkonkoma, it did start. I was actually surprised when I saw some of the information. I guess that well before us, the town, both Islip and Brookhaven, I want to say it was even in the 70s, started talking about what they could do to take advantage of that intersection of, there's an expressway, there's a train station, and an airport, regional airport. And they just never could get off the dime. It is kind of a planning. If you look, hindsight's always 20/20, but the fact that the airport terminals are on the south side of the airport as opposed to the north. If they were on the north side of those runways, the train station and the airport would share a parking lot, which would be amazing.
Yeah.
But so, yeah, we ended up, I guess there was the whole idea of developing the area picked up some steam. And I know it was Supervisor Lesko, and I can't remember who was at the time in Islip, kind of a joint group. They went out for an RFP, I believe it was in like 2011. I want to think about 10 years ago. And we were selected unanimously. And that's about a 53-acre development area to the north side. So it's all in Brookhaven. Islip was involved just because they were so proximate. And the master development agreement started. They did an urban renewal study, a blight study, to kind of lock the values of the properties in. It is much different, like you said, than a Patchogue or even Lindenhurst, where there was bones and it just needed a refill. This was basically creating much more similar to what we're doing down in Virginia, kind of a whole new area. And I believe the total is around 1,400 residential units. I think there's going to be a percentage that have to be, I think it's 10% or more, have to be for sale eventually. We have 260,000+ feet of commercial office, and about another 150, I believe, or more of retail. It's a form-based code, which was great. Again, you had the town of Brookhaven did a great job, even though there's a change in leadership, they kept with it. And they created a form-based code that, that we have the blocks and stuff set, but you can move things around, which is very, very helpful. There was some smart people involved on a lot of fronts. We delivered our first phase, which was unfortunately all residential, because that's kind of what was getting done. We have 489 units in 6 buildings that is completed. We completed a pump station. Again, sewer is so critical in all these. That's another thing that's happened. I remember when I first got out here 20 years ago, the environmentalists were fighting against sewer because they felt it was going to lead to development, but now they realize that we're just putting all our crap in the ground, excuse my friend, that sewers aren't actually that bad a thing. Let's get things treated so we don't have big problems. And It has allowed for smarter development. We don't have to sprawl, because to put out septic, we can actually put stuff a little tighter. But we ended up having to put in the sewer pump station, which was going to serve both our development, and it has the capacity for south side and the surrounding area. There's plenty of capacity there now. It pumps down the tracks to I think Southwest Sewer District. So and now we're in our phase 2, which will be, so that first development is to the far east. We're now just, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the train station, that large parking structure to the north. That's actually an MTA parking structure. So we'll be just west of that now with our phase 2A, which will have retail, I believe about 70,000 feet of retail, another 300 plus units, plus some office space, about 15,000 in phase 1, phase 2A, and then we have phase 2B, which is going to have some more housing and retail. We're excited. It is a little different. Like I said, we're actually going to create that quote unquote downtown, but you can't find a better location with respect to the 3 types of transportation. And as over time, especially over the last 10, 15 years, the population center of Long Island, which used to be somewhere in Nassau, has now crept its way. I think it's past Melville, heading this direction. So it's going to be, it is great. We delivered the last 2 buildings during COVID, which was awesome. The technology now has really allowed for people to take a look at renderings and take a look at apartments, and it helps that especially during COVID, a little fear mongering. There's these things that never been lived in before, which is great. Talking to what Russell said earlier, it is sort of a sad. I know Jim Coggin bemoans this a lot because of regulation and certain other things. We are really only, especially I don't know if everyone on this, but and I know Russ Albanese has done a great job down in Wyandanch, but the quality we're putting up right now, and to get it built, we are kind of serving the top of the pyramid. There was not a lot of what I would consider Class A type rental on Long Island at all, because if you could afford to get it built, you just put up anything, it was going to rent. And so now we're actually coming up with a higher quality. You're getting more renters by choice, and it's a lifestyle choice. And I think that's helped this whole renaissance as well. I think people now go down and say, wow, this isn't horrible, or I'd live here. This is great. You walk downstairs, get a cup of coffee. You need to go to Florida, turn your key, let me know if there's a problem, and you're out of here. So it is a lifestyle change. Again, we don't believe it's for everyone, but as you mentioned at the start, I think we've crept up in our percentage above 17, but there's still well over 100,000 units needed. Our entire industry, I don't think, is delivering even 2,000 a year. So we got a long way to go to find balance. But I think Ronkonkoma was a great start. So for that area.
So one thing that you mentioned that, again, for our viewers here, I just want to really accentuate is the form-based zoning. So the United States has followed this thing called Euclidean zoning forever. And there's only a few examples on the island. Here you're talking about Ronkonkoma, the EPCAL site out in Riverhead. The Riverhead Town Board saw it to do form-based zoning. But what it does is it gives a bulk approval for what you could build on a site, but doesn't limit you to where you put it, what goes next to what. And as long as you're not violating, health, or sewer, effluent, traffic, you can kind of mix around stuff. So basically you're letting the market, right? The market is really what makes these things successful or not successful. The market defines what happens here, at the site. And that's a big thing. So I'm glad to hear that that's starting to catch on, and we're seeing definitely more examples of that.
Yeah, and Wyandanch also followed a form-based code, and for a large development, it's also important because there's flexibility, and over time, demand changes as you learn from maybe a first phase, and you adapt. And the form-based code allows for relatively efficient changes to the, to building concept, and allows the municipality with their planning departments to make changes and to approve changes. So we found that it is really facilitated what we're doing.
Right, good.
Yeah, the 5 commercial, property types, residential for rent, obviously, hospitality, office, industrial, they're not correlated. So when you have if you had, and that's, even Reston, Virginia, which was this famous, town center, they went through a bankruptcy, I think, or they may be on their 3rd owner, because they weren't as form-based as you would hope. Because if you force someone to build an office building and it sits there empty, that it's going to be a failure for a while.
Yeah.
But if you have a form-based code and you say, hey, right now, the need and the financing that's available and the debt markets are really interested in multifamily, and bricks and mortar retail, as had a little suffering. I'm hearing that they may come back a little, especially if it's done right, more experiential. That may come on when the residential's peaking out. Once a residential area picks up, then the office becomes more popular because people want to not have to commute 10 hours a week. So with the form-based code, it allows you to bring the product on when it's needed and when it can be most likely or have the highest chance of succeeding and not creating a failure, which no one wants. We don't want to do it because we don't want to lose it, and the town or the village doesn't want it because you don't want to have a failed project.
The other benefit of a form-based code is that it brings about a greater sense of predictability for the developer, while at the same time the community knows what's possible and is brought into the fold to help direct how the area is going to be developed in a more friendly fashion. And so the more form-based codes that are created throughout the island, the more likely it is that it won't take 10 plus years for a wine dance to come about, right? Mm-hmm. Or, many years for, the Ronkonkoma hub and all those to be brought to reality. I can only imagine you, Russ and Rob, would much have had preferred it be a lot quicker to get to the levels of success that you're having, right? And so the form-based code definitely helps that along a bit. And there's a reason why in any given year there's plus or minus only 1,000 new apartments built throughout Long Island, and the demand is so much greater than that, as many of us have stated. So whatever can be done to address that gap is always helpful. If you don't mind, David, yeah. I wouldn't mind mentioning one thing that I'm sure most of us are aware of, that it flies in the face of progress, and that is legislation that was put in place as part of last year's state budget that requires prevailing wage to be paid for labor if a development will benefit to a certain extent from a tax abatement program, a pilot, mm-hmm. or a number of other scenarios. Mm-hmm. And that legislation takes effect in January of 2022.
Right.
And the impacts of that are drastic. So the great things that the four of us are talking about right now are going to become much more limited in the future if we collectively as an industry cannot figure out how to come up with a workable balance between the tax abatements that are necessary to make projects financeable and the construction industry remaining employed and active in our local markets.
Yeah, that is a big issue. We're starting to see different organizations, and the REI Real Estate Institute, we took a position on prevailing wage a few years ago with the white paper. Again, there's a disconnect between, like what you're saying. It's like prevailing wage is supposed to be giving poorer people more money, but yet it's driving up the cost for apartments that they can't afford to live in, because now you've got to charge, you have higher construction costs, building costs, and it's keeping them out of this. So there, I mean, look, what I can say is I'm involved in a number of these organizations. We need more of us that are on this video right now to be more involved. You know, whether it's people from our companies, to talk to legislators and have them understand. And you can't do it during a legislative session because, we're talking about government here, and, there's politics happening in those sessions. So we all of us, and to the people in our viewership here that work for companies that are affected by this, that you're in a position where you've got knowledge, you need to get involved in local government, and local government, includes New York State. So, Russell, we're totally with you. Totally understand that issue. And look, I mean, one of my other questions is, all of you are building beautiful Class A apartments. When are we going to see Class B apartments? So I think, so Russ Tepper, I think this parlays into that, right? How do you create something cheaper that the millennials, that's what we started. It was for the brain drain. Let's stop the brain drain going into Manhattan. And, we wound up discovering multiple tranches of other groups of people that are 40, 50, that are divorcee, want to stay close to their kids, are okay paying $4,000 a month. But meanwhile, we still have the youth not being serviced. So how do we get to that, building the Class B type of a product where people have, clean, modern places to live? How do we do that in an area that's got high taxes and high barriers?
It's very challenging. Yeah, it's very challenging because there has not been any cessation in property owners' view of their land value. Construction costs have not gone down in any material way as was initially anticipated at the beginning of the pandemic. And fast forward to now, we're a year into it, construction costs are actually now skyrocketing in certain trades more than others, like lumber and others.
Commodities are going up.
Commodities, absolutely. And then you have the necessity for a pilot in order to make communities that we want to develop financeable. But IDAs are now offering pilots that are shorter term. And so that has an impact on the financeability. So there are a lot of variables that make it very, very difficult to build a quote unquote value play type community, especially since the vast majority of people that want to, or that live in Long Island and don't want to leave Long Island and will stay there and grow families there, have a very high expectation as to their living environment. So all of that does not make it very conducive to build a less expensive, lower rent option on Long Island. And frankly, in many of the communities that we are all developing in, the demographics are such that most of the renters that are going to live in our communities can afford to pay a rent that we need in order to afford to build the community. So when you add prevailing wage on top of that, it creates a nearly impossible situation to continue as we're going, no less contemplate what you're suggesting.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think the prevailing wage issue, that is a looming very big concern going forward. And it even, it adds uncertainty too, as a developer, and approaching a project. The more uncertainty there is, the more risk, and you can't plan for, once the tighter controls are put on who can bid on a project, and it's not a free market bidding process. Look, we all use a lot of union contractors, and some of the best contractors for major projects are union. And but the bidding process has to be a level playing field, like other municipalities. We're very active. New York City used to be a completely union town, and the past 10 years has gone to a lot of open shop. The unions are still very busy, but there's also a lot of very good non-union contractors. And just to comment on the, Class A or Class B multifamily, there's really not, in my view, a big difference in cost between Class A and Class B multifamily, because the structural components, life safety, elevators, building systems, all have to be up to a certain standard, whether you're building affordable housing or luxury housing. The only way we know to truly build affordable and workforce housing is through public subsidy and through low-income housing tax credits. And that's how in order to build in Wyandanch, we've built all our buildings with a range of incomes. The first two buildings had 35% market and 65% income restricted, from anywhere from 50% AMI through 90%. Our most recent building goes up to 100% AMI, and 100% AMI in Suffolk County is pretty much market. It's certainly market for the surrounding community. But without some kind of public financing, and actually the program is through New York State is very effective. It brings in tax credit investors that bring down provides substantial. The project is still at risk. As a developer, we're still at risk, but there are tax credit investor equity that enables the lower effective cost. But then what comes with that is restrictions on income limits and rents. But it's been very effective to create truly affordable and workforce housing.
Go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, so you could do a whole nother seminar on this, because there's so many there's so many things that as we talked about, the regulations that have come through, and New York is, like I said, we have the prevailing wage. We do a lot of union as well, but you add that, our insurance costs are insane because of the ladder and scaffold law. And I'm not trying to, encourage anyone to get that they're going to be hurt. The rest of the country does everything is workers' comp, and if there's some type of intentional injury, there, but our state is the only state that has the ladder and scaffold, so our insurance costs are always stunningly higher. Last year, you couldn't get gas because they wouldn't approve a pipeline, so we just had to the IDAs, and I'm going to get myself in trouble. We love the IDAs, but they've now added So industrial development agencies is a spur economic activity, but they're now adding there's not a single one that doesn't add a housing, workforce housing or affordable. And while I understand why, those two things are not necessarily in line with each other to create economic activity and and there are housing programs. So that's kind of muted that. When you add the prevailing wage component, it may not make the IDA worth it. If you're going to have to have a certain labor cost that's going to eliminate or cost more than the benefit you're going to procure, it's terrible. After Sandy, I know you guys are experiencing the SWIPs. The amount of money spent underground now to hold rainwater is shocking. So, and that's going to, like Russ said, that occurs whether you're doing A, B, or C. I will tell you that Suffolk County, they do have some great programs. They do add some assistance on whether it be a forgivable loan or types of grants if you maintain a certain level of workforce, but very, very, very difficult to create that quote unquote B product. I know Bob Coghlan's, he always says availability is affordability. If we can keep a pipeline and keep getting housing developed, eventually there will be affordable units, and they don't always have to be the brand new ones, but very, very difficult problem. And it's been made a little bit worse because of the newer legislation. So.
Yeah. So from what I'm hearing, it's not only the cost of prevailing wage, but it's the cost and the complications to comply with following the prevailing wage. So it's really multiple fold here.
Yep.
It's
I know we have to wrap up shortly, David, but I would just say that in my opinion, the prevailing wage requirement is just unnecessary, because all of us that are on this call, participating in this call, we actively pursue open shop bidding for all the communities we develop. So every qualified union subcontractor has an opportunity to bid on every community we build, and we hire union when appropriate, for sure. And what in essence it's doing is creating a uncompetitive environment, analogous to a cartel almost, to just force all of the work be union. And the reason why that's absolutely going to happen is because the pilot benefits that you need in order to make projects financeable are to an amount that are large enough to mandate the prevailing wage.
Right.
So something's got to give. If you do not want to see new development occur after 2022 begins, then leave the legislation as is.
Yeah, there's certainly been a bigger focus. I was even there was a developer came in and they had a parcel, they wanted to do 100 units. And at the time there was a buzz to have many more than 10 or 20% of them to be affordable. So I said, all right, why don't we try to do this? Out of the 100 units, let's give them 50 market rate. Out of the other 50 that he's asking for, let's allow him to build 100 units there. So now 150 total.
Yep.
But those 100 have to be affordable. And who I got pushback from, I don't remember if it was state or county, but affordable units, because I was saying, look, bathrooms are a cost, kitchens are a cost, and whether you have a 1,600 square foot unit or an 800 square foot unit, the kitchen and bathroom are pretty close in how much they cost. But if you make the square footage from, 1,500 to 750 square feet or 600 square feet, that savings should be passed on to the renter. But we got pushed back from, I forgot if it was state or county, that the affordable units have to be indistinguishable from the market rate units. So I'm like, well, here you're getting 100 units affordable. Your scenario, you're getting 10 or 20 units affordable, right? It seems like there's a disconnect here on what the goal is. Do we want more? So anyway, to answer your question, there's got to be a lot of work. And again, I think it's on us to reach out to our representatives and have conversations with them offline before they go in. I mean, I'm part of the Commercial Industrial Brokers Society. We're like close to hiring a lobbyist, just to deal with some of this stuff. And we're not even residential brokers, but it does affect companies that want to move here and get employees. If we don't have the younger employees, the companies don't want to move here, so Russ Tepper, I have a question for you. We've seen a lot of nationals, Rob and Russ Albanese live locally and their whole crew lives locally. So I'm not going to ask them the same question, but for Mill Creek, why are you guys still here when it's so difficult to navigate prevailing wage, taxes, the IDA, the long entitlement process? What keeps you in the game here? Are you thinking, or Russ Tepper?
In all seriousness,
Oh, you have a delay. You have a delay for a second. All right, I think he's frozen for the moment.
Awesome.
Okay. So, that's one thing you can do if you don't like the question on the Zoom thing.
Just hang up.
Yeah, you just don't move. It looks like a freeze.
I'll tell you, I'll follow up on your last comment. That's one of the things, one of the great things about Long Island is we have these great little communities. One of the bad things, we have so many municipalities. But we haven't developed in Manhattan, but I do recall they had a code where if you get an FAR bonus if you provide 20% affordable. Boom. We don't have that out here. We're fighting to get every unit, and then there's an affordability. If that could be developed, or if a municipality did come up with something like that, said, hey, you want an extra bonus, an FAR bonus to add extra units, you just have to make a certain percentage affordable. That's so much easier to pencil out. Very, like I said, one of the benefits of a form-based code. But yeah. I think I will be long gone by the time that occurs in Long Island, I think, unfortunately. But no.
Yeah. So I'm gonna take some. We're like at 10 after 11, so we're gonna take some viewer questions. One last thing. So Rob Kent, you were telling me about Rent Grata, and I kind of explain a little bit about that, if you would.
Well, that's one thing that a lot of technology has come into our space, obviously, and this we just looked at it. We haven't. I think we're starting at one of our projects, but it's called Rent Grata, and you basically on your property website you have tenants, or you have your residents, who most of them really love where they live, and because of now, especially with COVID, a lot of people didn't want to come and visit personally. You can reach out to a resident in the project. Obviously, we have to, we want to talk to them, make sure you don't want anyone saying something stupid, which happens all the time. But you can then get in an offline conversation with an actual resident to talk about the community. And if the prospect actually takes a unit, the resident gets a little kiss on the cheek, some kind of gift card or something. So we haven't. We're rolling it out. We're planning on using it, but it seemed like a great way to get so that the resident the potential resident can actually talk to an actual resident and have their conversations and know it's a little more direct. So we'll see how it works out.
All right, good. So Russ Tepper, if you heard my question,
I did. I apologize. For some reason I got disconnected, but the answer to the question is that we've been here a long time. We have been very successful on Long Island. We have built a great reputation, and what we bring to the market is really in demand and well received. And so we have remained committed to Long Island because Long Island welcomes us. And you're right, David, there are a number of other larger developers that have thrown their hands up and left the submarket. But we've made significant financial commitments here. While I do not live on Long Island, the people that build our communities live in the area, and we feel very committed to the area. And we intend to stay here for a very long time. So long as we can remain an active member in the community and finance the communities we want to develop, we absolutely will remain here.
Right, good. So I think we've shown in each instance, and we're covering subsidized apartments here, Patchogue, Port Jeff, downtown Port Jeff, TRITEC is built in, certainly didn't need any rejuvenation, with Mineola and in each of these instances, the communities have benefited, from both the construction of the developments, of the the demographic and the additional disposable income, which changes, banks now coming into the communities, shopping centers, now have food anchors, where many of them didn't have before. So Rob Ken, I still go to Patchogue for the Carl Amer. It's like the only Carl Amer store on Long Island is still in Patchogue.
Yeah.
But so we're going to take some questions here. One of the questions are with COVID-19. So it's a little bit off topic, but how are you guys responding to, not for the construction, but for the actual finished product? How are you guys responding? Like, are there now office areas being added to the units, or are there community areas that you could go in, or what else, whatever you guys, so anybody could take that question. Go ahead, Rob.
On a couple of, obviously on the stuff that's in production, it's very tough to switch horses, while you're going, but we are coming out of the ground on 2 new projects this year, both in Ronkonkoma Phase 2 and Bayshore. And these, whether you call them 1-bedroom plus dens or 2-bedroom plus a den, there are these creation of an area where you can have a workspace in the apartment. We're very fortunate in Lindenhurst too, because of the design. We have quite a few units that have an area that you can easily set up a desk. You're adding USB charging ports and that kind of thing. So that is something for sure. We've been looking at either as an amenity for the residents and resident use only, or as a have a third-party user of the homework type office somewhere in the facility where you can come in and rent a private space. We have kind of created working spaces within some of the common areas so they can stay segregated and quiet. They did a nice job in Ronkonkoma on a couple of the buildings. They have some very good breakout areas for residents to use. So, and obviously along with the other stuff, the MERV filters and all the things in your common areas. And, as I mentioned, we keep all of our stuff is separate. So, all the electric meters, we don't have like a joint heat or air, circled air. Every unit has its own HVAC system. A lot of the code changes now, all this stuff has to be vented directly outside, both kitchen and bathroom. So there's things like that I think as we continue to move forward and have a better understanding of, people maybe having to hunker down, that we'll have design elements that'll be added in.
All right, good. So I think at this time I'd like to just mention that, so the Real Estate Institute is getting more involved in these issues. We've stepped up our white paper focus, and we've got 2 that are coming out this year. One is this actual topic, changes to community after development, where we're going to look at a community and come up with, financial benchmarks and metrics of what happens, in the community. The last one we did was the addition of school-age children to school districts. And that is something that's now been quoted and been used
We've used
in
it.
a lot of municipalities. If you haven't read it, you need 11 apartments on average to get 1 child. So you've got 11 apartments paying taxes to put 1 child into the school district. The other white paper and the next topic for REI, which is in April, is the Zen and the Art of the Industrial Development Agency. That's the topic. So that crosses over to what we've discussed, today as well. But I wanted to take this opportunity to thank each of you, for sharing, your experience and, and keeping it here, and, keep the construction going at 1,000 units a year. We need 100,000 units. I think, Rob Kent, you're right. We're not going to be here 100 years from now. But anyway, but thank you, everybody. Thank everybody, our viewers, our sponsors and supporters, and have a great weekend.
Thanks, David.
Thank you. Thanks, Dave.